There we go. Increase my gain a little bit. 3, 2, 1. Hey, it's AAA and welcome to Couldn't Scare Less. This is a weird instance where I'm recording this episode of the podcast way before it goes out, because this was my last script I wrote before the writer's strike for the Autopsy of Jane Doe. I've been holding on to this script since then. And whenever you're hearing this, means the writers and actors strike, or at least one of them, has ended, or I put it up because it looks like it won't be ending. And I've been doing, presumably, other coverage in the meantime that doesn't cover any work related to the people on strike. Not because I'm against the strike, but because I'm in favor of the strike, and I don't want to promote anything that the strikers worked on, that they would be losing money out on, if that makes sense. Do I need to do that? No. Am I doing it just for my own peace of mind, and so I can feel most ethically okay putting out these episodes? Yeah. So, this was the Autopsy of Jane Doe. I decided to cover this because it was one of the first horror movies I remember being scared of before I went into it. Because younger me, in what year did this come out? This came out in 2016. So I would have been about 15 when the trailers came out, which I remember seeing all over YouTube when I was a teenager. They'd pop up even like before my Minecraft videos I'd watch around that time. And it wasn't until later that it was on Netflix briefly. At the time of recording this, it's on Hulu. And Tubi. I don't know how long it'll stay on Hulu, but it's been on Tubi for a while. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It's unsettling in a good way. It's not too gory, not too explicit, but it covers some heavier themes, and I think in a pretty good and unique fashion. It's by far the best, in my opinion, most enjoyable of the late night hauntings genre. Second only maybe to... second only or second place. They go back and forth in my head with Last Shift. I really like Last Shift, which I will be covering, again, post-strike. I also, like, number 3 for me would probably be The Void. I really enjoyed The Void, but I don't totally fit it in the hauntings subgenre like some people do. Just because it takes place at night in a place of business, I don't think counts it as a haunting just because of how it does things. Anyways, forget all that. Let's talk about why I like the Autopsy of Jane Doe. It's a very small, tight-knit cast of characters in an increasingly claustrophobic environment, with excellent scares and suspense throughout. It's a very enjoyable and frightening 90 minutes, especially for, like, if you're a teen, if you're newer to the horror genre, it'll get some solid jumps out of you. But even for veterans, it's an enjoyable watch. And I'll be honest, this one doesn't have a ton to go over in terms of its, like, deeper themes and meanings. I'll be talking about them still, but there's not as much here. And that's okay. Not every movie needs to be deconstructing something about society. Though, before I go into the trigger warnings from Does the Dog Die, if you can go into this movie without assessing the trigger warnings, provided you can handle these two things, on-screen autopsies, and you don't find yourself having to check Does the Dog Die, specifically for animal stuff, then you could probably watch this movie. However, if not, that's totally fine. No movie that I've watched so far has had me in the element of its horror so much on a first viewing as this one did when I would have been in college by the time I watched this. So I was like 18. It does have some pretty potent trigger warnings that I will run through quickly before we get into the synopsis portion. Starting with animal death. And yes, the dead animal is showed on screen, not for too long. It's a cat. It's a pet. There are bugs. There is one gross particular bug scene. It's not very long. But it's not spiders, it's bugs. Abused becomes the abuser, technically. There is off-screen drugging. Sexual assault is found during the autopsy, but never shown on screen. Restrainment is discussed. There is cutting with like scalpel, bone saw, that sort of thing, but not in the cutting context. Does a dog die is 27-28 split on is someone burned alive? Depends on your definition of alive. There is not technically a head squash, but there is a head caved in. There is some... There's not eye mutilation. I don't know why it says that. That's wrong. It's incorrect. There's described genital trauma, but never shown. There is quite a bit of gore, given that it's an autopsy. But it's not like someone being ripped apart gore like you'd see in something like Terrifier. It's very medical. There is stabbing. There's 8 votes for body horror. I disagree, because I think they don't know what body horror means. So, it's not the thing, or anything like it. There is some, finger, toe stuff. Not what I would call mutilation, but definitely injury. Buried alive. Again, does the dog die is wrong here. Yes and no. There is tooth stuff. Tooth stuff bothers you. Is someone tortured? Not in the traditional sense, but I would still say it is a yes. Amputation, technically, but not shown on screen, but the stump is shown. I told you, there's quite a few here, but it's divisive because it's an autopsy, so there's some back and forth on disagreements. There is a death by falling, but it's very telegraphed. There is bone breaking. There's attempted self-sacrifice, major character dies, death. Sorry, having major character die beneath someone die is kind of funny. I feel like they kind of need to have a hierarchy. Parent death happens and is discussed, so that also checks off family member. Are there ghosts? Depends on if you believe the in-movie explanation for the plot's occurrences. So I would say 50-50 on that one. Possession, again, 50-50 on if you believe the movie's explanation for what's happening or not. Jump scares, yes. There is a, like, blink and you miss it bit of trypophobic content. There is audio gore from the autopsy. There are the use of needles and syringes for the autopsy. Is there a hospital scene? Kind of. Takes place in a morgue. Death by suicide is mentioned and later shown. The body is shown. And a suicide is discussed. Is reality unstable or unhinged? I disagree. It's not a breaking of reality, it's something else. But I could see how you would hit yes on that. There is some two mildly claustrophobic scenes. There are sudden loud noises. Some brief instances of flashing lights, which I do actually discuss in my synopsis. There is some obscene language and gestures, but not too much. A little bit of shaky cam, but enough that I was able to handle it. If someone watched without knowing, technically, yeah. There is nudity of the dead body, but it's not sexualized in any way. It does have a sad ending, and there is blood/gore. But again, it's very medical. And that has been me going through the full Autopsy of Jane Doe, Does the Dog Die? Trigger warning segment. Before we hop into our synopsis, I would like to, again, say, keep in mind, This fantastic 90-minute film is free to watch on Tubi. It's also on Hulu at the moment, at the time of me recording this. It's probably still on Tubi, because it's been on there for like 2 years. It's pretty tame for horror, provided you can handle the medical stuff. But, without further ado, let's hop into the synopsis of the film, and then after that, I will talk about my thoughts about the film, and dissect the stuff we're given, like its ending, and its meaning, and all that. We get some opening credits and a title card with the sound of leaves blowing over top some pitch-black dirt, before we're taken to an idyllic, blindingly white house in Grantham, Virginia. Very nice suburban house, and we kind of pan through the window in a very nice shot, pulling through the front window to see the outside, and then see a CSI who's coated head to toe in protective covering. And this camera will gradually take us to see more and more of the violence that unfolded in this beautiful home. We never actually get a full rundown of this crime scene, as it's not all that important to the plot, besides foreshadowing and establishing a pattern. But for the actual plot of the film, it's not super important. They actually explain why it's not important later on. I'll get to that. A few camera flashes transition us around from shot to shot with the camera. It's a nice effect, but if you're like me and don't love flashing lights, you can, it's very telegraphed. Like, there's the winding of the camera before the flash, so I was able to, like, preemptively, like, kind of wait for the flash, look away, look back, see what was there, hear the look back, flash, etc. One of these flashes, we see an old woman dead by what appears to be a kitchen knife wound to the neck, followed by a close-up of the front door locked up and bloodied. It's a little important. Then a dead old man from what appears to be a gunshot wound. We're not shown either in graphic detail, but they are there. Upstairs, they also find someone who had some quite gnarly, blunt force trauma to the face from a hammer. It's not too gory. The face is covered in blood, and I'm blind, so I can't really tell who this could have been, but it's a person. I just can't identify them at all through all the blood. Someone we learn is the sheriff walks over said body to take a look out the bedroom window and kind of sighs as a news van pulls up before he's called over the walkie to come down and see something. As the sheriff descends into an unfinished basement, there's blood coating the plastic covering on the walls. With a marker A next to it, they reveal a partially dug up but very intact body. This is our Jane Doe. No relation to Paul and Carol, the sheriff is told, that them being the dead couple upstairs. We're also told more details on the crime by who, based off the badge, I would assume is the deputy. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry or even scratches on the outside of the house. She says it's her opinion they were trying to break out, not for someone to try and break in. With an intense music swell and a camera click on the Jane Doe's face, we transition to where we'll be spending basically the rest of the movie, a morgue. The camera shows us around the wood-paneled interior, with a long, well-lit hallway connecting a janky-looking elevator to an office. Pictures give us some close-ups. In said hallway tell us we're in the Tilden Morgue and Crematorium, depicting two pictures of two couples, each with a young boy, telling us that this is a family business nearing its third generation. And a pair of double doors show us the crematorium briefly, before the camera centers on a single blue door that is our morgue. Music is playing as the latest father and son duo are finishing an examination of a burn victim, a 6'1" male named Otis Howard. We get a little montage of them finishing up the autopsy, removing the organs, all on video to find the cause of death. The father quizzes the son, asking, what's the cause of death here? It's a softball, meaning an easy catch. The boy, by boy I mean someone who's between 18 and probably at the oldest 23, guesses smoke inhalation. The father gives kind of a skeptical, and the son points out a damaged nasal passage, throat, and lungs, which the father acquiesces, but then points out that the lungs aren't compatible with life, meaning they're the lungs of a dead person, not the lungs that killed someone. I really enjoy this scene, because we have the father explaining to look before you leap, talking about how important it is to have full, well-rounded logic before you try and use that logic to make decisions off of. And it's important to look at a problem from every aspect, rather than just take a piece of information and run with it and see what you get. It does a good job of telegraphing to us, the audience, that this is a horror movie where the protagonist will be relatively logical and competent, which is a plus. We learn more about this body, as they find he was found dead in his kitchen, the house was on fire, but he was only 30 feet from the front door. The father indicates to the skull, and finds a small fracture, which caused swelling in the brain, called a subdural hematoma, meaning he died before the fire ever really even got going. Everybody has a secret. Some people are just better at hiding it than others, the father says, to which the son replies, well, some people are better at finding them. Father reassures son, saying that he'll get there. The son makes an offhanded comment about, nobody coming to claim the body, and that him being alone is what killed him, which is a tragic statement, which the father immediately corrects with, no, he fell and hit his head, that's why he died. Then after a second, the father's facial expressions change to indicate that the point was made. Right as a cell phone rings, well, dings, I guess, we learn the son has plans that night with his girlfriend Emma to go see a movie. And the son asks, when was the last time his dad went to see a movie? We learned that it was The Notebook, which his wife had him go see with her for her birthday one year, which he basically immediately fell asleep during, but apparently remembered most of the plot despite being asleep. It's a funny scene, relatively lighthearted. I like my horror movies to kind of, especially when they start with a grisly crime scene, give me a little bit of levity before we go right back into the scares, and it does it relatively well. They finish up the autopsy. The dad fixes a flickery light, which definitely won't be relevant later, grabs his jacket, and goes to open the metal ground hatch entrance to smoke outside next to the Tilton sign. The burned body gets placed on a pallet and locked up, and the boy removes his scrubs, right as a cat jumps out of an open air vent in the room carrying something. We learn this cute little booger is Stanley the cat, who has just killed a mouse. The son, who we still don't know the name of, calls to his dad as noises can be heard overhead. He walks out into the hallway and looks into one of those round corner mirrors you see in hospitals. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, you can just probably Google a picture of one. Before, boom, we get our first jump scare of the movie, but it's the girlfriend scaring the crap out of him because he was too focused on the mirror and didn't see the person right beside him. This is also apparently her first time in the morgue, and the boy desperately wants to leave. But Emma's like, you got to see my job, why can't I see you at yours? She seems very fascinated by the pallets, learned that there were 3 bodies today, and asked to see one. He says there's things you just can't unsee, which is very true, and that his dad would never let her do that. Only for him to frickin' appear in the room without making a sound like Batman. Just pans over at him and he's just been in the room silently this whole, for unknown duration. He's just like, try me, as he takes a sip of his cup of coffee. The dad lets Emma pick a body and chooses one named Danielle. That old woman, creepy looking skin, mouth sewn shut, yucky. She then changes her mind and claims she meant the one next to it. This one is named Lewis, and its face is caved in, and a bloody sheet covers the head. We don't see you under the sheet right now. When both bodies were revealed, they had a little dingling noise, as we see they have a bell tied to the ankle, which Emma obviously asked about because it's kind of weird. Research indicates what the dad says here is actually true, in his actual historical fact, which is pretty cool, so I'll just echo what is said. That in the olden days, it used to be really hard to tell if someone was comatose, in a coma, or dead. So the bells would be there to jingle if someone woke up in the morgue, and that someone wasn't actually dead. There's also medical conditions, even to this day, that are known about, where your heart can stop or slow down to such an extent where you appear dead. There have been a couple instances of people, like, waking up in the morgue with these kind of medical conditions, and people thought they were dead, and they were, like, mid-autopsy or something. Very interesting cases. If you like medical history, you can look into that. The father claims that he still uses these bells because he's kind of a traditionalist. We learned that the crushed face is covered because it was a point-blank gunshot to the face, but that wasn't the cause of death. He actually first dies of being poisoned, and then was shot in the face. Emma makes a, like, what the frick kind of face, and the dad says that it's their job to know the how, not the why. The why is, quote, for the cops and shrinks. You can probably hear my fingers cracking as I made the air quotes there. Emma turns to her boyfriend, kind of horrified, and clearly kind of regrets her curiosity here. But then she kind of reconsiders as she reaches to remove the cloth. The boyfriend grabs her hand. Dad's like, nah, let her do what she wants to do. Just as she's about to lift it, the dad shakes the ankle and rings the bell and scares the ever living crap out of her. I assume that somehow the dad, I guess in his lurking, saw Emma scare his son and decided to scare Emma back. But we don't know how he saw that, or if he saw that, or if it's a coincidence. Either way, it's a funny scene. It elicited a chuckle the first time I saw it. The boy and Emma still not gotten the guy's name yet. I hate when movies take a long time to give their protagonists their names. It's a running thing on this channel where I try not to, like, reveal the names of characters until they're revealed in the movie time. They start talking about their date as they're heading towards the elevator, but it dings open as they're about to head into it, and we see the sheriff wheeling in a body bag. The dad tells them to go enjoy their date. The kid's clearly feeling guilty about leaving work. An exasperated Emma indicates that him leaving her to help his dad, is kind of a routine thing that happens with some regularity. And asks, well, what's he going to do when you leave? And we learn he hasn't told his dad that he's leaving town. We finally learn the character's name is Austin Tilden, huzzah. He doesn't actually want to follow in his father's footsteps and be a third-generation morgue worker, and plans to leave town with his girlfriend soon. Austin says they'll catch a movie still later in the night, so that way he can help his dad. And we learn that his mom died 2 years ago, and that's kind of what has halted his plans, because he doesn't want to leave his dad well and truly alone. They have a kiss. Honestly, I love this couple. I like them. They're sweet. They seem to genuinely like each other. Have some immediate depth. And I wish it existed outside of a horror movie, because, like, the kind of cute, healthy relationships that are like, oh, I like that. They just don't survive in horror movies most of the time. Like, look at Honeymoon. Amazing couple. Tragic ending. Very few good couples get good endings in horror. Can I think of any off the top of my head? I mean, if you like the relationships in Scream 6, minor spoiler there, I guess. Those last through the film. Woo. Anyways, she responds with a maybe and drives away. We then cut to the Jane Doe being opened up by the dad. Opened up, like, from the bag. And the cat starts growling and goes, and gets shooed away. Be gone, cat, and your foreshadowing nonsense. The sheriff shares his theory that one of the workers who was working on the basement was hiding the body, not knowing that the Douglases, the dead couple, were home, and somehow everyone died in the resulting altercation. The sheriff is really scared of the press, and says the autopsy has to be done tonight because they need answers to tell the people. I personally kind of wish the sheriff had stuck around to add to our body count, but he does leave via the elevator and is safe from what is about to unfold. Cut that. I need to stretch because I'm freaking agonies. Agonies. I'm being added. shit. Alright, I'm gonna make sure all this is cut out. Alright. Page 3 of 7. The music comes back, and they get to work. We also learn the dad's name, finally. His name is Tommy. Anyways, the body, as they remark, is pretty clean. There's no bruising or bleeding or visible wounds. And as they go to inspect the eyes, Austin questioningly says they're gray? But we learn from Tommy that these eyes are so incredibly clouded that it indicates the body's actually been dead for quite a long time, or a few days, at minimum. But there's no rigor mortis, no rigor mortis with the several day post-body clouded eyes, kind of strange, but not impossible. Austin then notices something else really strange. Her waist appears to be misshapenly small, as though it just, quote, doesn't fit to the rest of her frame. The observation goes onto the board, and we get some audio horror of broken bone sounds, as Tommy finds that Jane Doe has fractured wrists and ankles, with no outward signs of the trauma. That is like one of the only things that made me grimace on rewatching this film for this episode, which was now months ago for when you're hearing this. It's very weird recording an episode that's going to go so far into the future, probably. It's really off, like, unsettlingly close. As someone who has broken many a bone, it sounded like a bone breaking. Tommy writes it off, but Austin continues to investigate closer. He finds that her ankles aren't just broken, they're completely shattered, which is why they made such disgusting noises when prodded, as it was lots of little bits of bone hitting into each other. Under her fingernails, toes, and in her hair, they find high amounts of peat, indicating that she was probably buried in that. But given the story we were told before, that indicates that her body had been buried a previous time. Because obviously there wouldn't be peat in the bottom of a basement, which they discuss. Her nasal and ear canals are clear, but they open up the mouth and find a very crudely severed tongue. It's gross, but thankfully not too graphic. I don't love intense gore. I don't love needlessly intense gore. We'll go with that. But this movie's more surgical, almost kind of clean gore I can handle really easily, regardless of how I'm doing that day. Tommy, looking at the tongue wound, harkens back to another case that was about 15 years ago that he says was from a human trafficking ring. They would tightly bind the hands and ankles and cut out the tongues to keep them quiet. And as Austin goes to photograph the tongue, her nose starts to bleed as we get a really gross close-up, at least gross to me, of a nose flying out. A fly flying out of the nose. And then just yeets itself straight into the light overhead. The light overhead. Oh my god. And it just kills itself in the light. They investigate the mouth further after finding a molar missing. And Tommy reaches in and pulls out a strand of fabric from her throat that gets bagged as we hear thunder roaring overhead. This next thing is something I only noticed on the most recent watch through I did for this episode, which was the 4th time I'd seen the movie, I think. The thunder starts, even though earlier in the movie we could hear the radio saying that they're expecting several days of sunny weather. Odd, isn't it? We'll talk about that later when we discuss our ending. Tommy, off-screen, handles the private parts with a swab, something Austin, as well as the camera, looks away from, and we learn that she's literally torn up inside with cut wounds. Like, yeah. It confirms the theory, but they both kind of take a quick off-screen break before they move on to the internal examination. And here's when we start getting our horror, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Right as Tommy goes to cut the chest open, like the classic Y cut, Music swells as they cut into it, and blood spills out. Austin's like, no, that shouldn't happen. And he's right. It only typically happens in incredibly fresh corpses from a buildup of internal pressure from cellular death throughout the organs, forcing blood upwards before the blood itself starts to die. The blood cells itself start to die and lose some of their viscosity and their coloration. And as they look at the crosscut, they find something which, according to Austin, looks like melanoma on the inside in the dermis layer of skin. He doesn't say it like that, but I actually know what he means when he just says, oh, this looks like a bit of melanoma here. It can actually happen under the dermis layer. It's really rare. It would also be, like, impossible for doctors to find. The doctor, I mean, it probably is. The dad is unsure. But they collect a sample for the lab. Again, they don't need to worry about that. If they can, that probably wasn't their cause of death here, is what they're thinking at this point. But right as they collect this sample, they go over to the fridge to find the fridge is leaking blood because the Jane's blood sample they took earlier off screen, I guess, exploded in the fridge along with some other ones. And then it's Tommy. He's like, okay, that's weird. Starts using the rib cracker. We see the lungs are incredibly blackened from intense burning. He compares it to finding a bullet in the brain without a gunshot wound. They also find scar tissue on the heart and some of the organs that I can't identify, honestly. Blindness go burr from the quick shot of it we get. Tommy indicates that this was a suffering death. Someone went out of their way to cause this woman immense harm and wanted her to feel all of it. This revelation is met with a loud banging, which Austin leaves to go check. As he leaves the morgue room, the examination room, whatever you want to call it, creepy noises can be heard in the hallway, like a overhead creaking. Austin sees a figure briefly in the round mirror, only to turn the corner and find no one. Seeing things in the darkness, that's totally fine. Definitely doesn't mean you're gonna die. We cut back to Tommy, who's taking a closer look at the body and finds something. A weird peeling up of skin near the blackened melanoma that they were looking at earlier. And as he goes to examine it, he cuts his wrist on one of her cut ribs and has to go clean it up because it starts gushing. It's not like too intense. Like, it's a cut across the wrist, but it's not like a super deep cut across the wrist. Like, it's bleeding, but not like he's dying bleeding. Austin makes his way to where the AC is, and hears a rattling in the vents. He opens a closed vent to check in on it, only to get jump scared by something in the vent, and falls off the stool he was standing on. His dad runs to him with a flashlight, and when they peer the flashlight into the vent, they sadly see a very bloodied and whimpering Stanley the cat. They pull him out, and they both hold him closely in their arms. One last time, before Tommy leans down and breaks his neck to put him out of the pain. And the whimpering stops and goes to cremate him. Tears quietly stream down Austin's face as he leaves his dad with the cat, checking the mirror again to find nothing. Although upon returning to the examination room, one of the drawers opens itself creepily, letting Austin know that something's still off. Tommy comes in and remarks that Stanley was always a pain, but it was his wife's cat, and one of the last things he had left from her. Tommy doesn't remain emotional for very long, and promptly returns to work as they get to stage 3 and begin an organ-by-organ examination. Upon examination of her stomach, they find a flower, which, thanks to a book, they identify as Jimson weed, a paralyzing-inducing plant, which is also from the northern states, which was referenced earlier in areas with dense peat. The radio indicates the storm above is worsening, and Austin says they should leave for the night for their safety. Make sure they don't get stuck in there or anything. The dad gets a bit passive-aggressive about the issue, and they continue on to find a small bag in one of her intestines with her missing tooth in it, wrapped in an old shroud covered in Roman numerals and glyph work. I'll talk more about the real-life history of this during our ending discussion. Austin identifies it as ritualistic, so they play out that line of thinking, that this woman was bound, had her tongue cut out, was poisoned and paralyzed. They forced a cloth down her throat containing her own tooth, stab her several times, and then burn her. But somehow none of this is visible on the outside of her body. Makes no sense, and they agree, and they're dumbfounded. The storm worsens, as according to the radio there's a flash flood warning incoming. And the dad and son argue about whether they should try and figure it out, or not, and just speculate and move on. But then the radio gives out a final warning. "This is not a storm you want to get caught in, folks." Followed by, "One thing's for sure, you're not going anywhere." As the song "Let the Sun Shine In" resumes from earlier. This song started playing randomly on the radio earlier in the movie at the start of the autopsy, and they quickly switch it off. This time, the radio changes the channel back, and we hear more of the creepy children singing, "Let the sun shine in." Austin practically begs for them to leave, right as Tommy cuts at the skin and finds something. It wasn't melanoma. There are 2 sets of skin on her body. 2 sets of epidermis and dermis. Another person's skin has been put over top of her. On the inside of this one, though, it's covered with more runes and markings. And they cut it off. And right as they do so, the light above the table explodes into shards of glass. And the exam room door slams itself closed. Austin grabs the flashlight and finds all the pallets that the body should be open. And they're just like, "Okay, fine, we're leaving. Go." Thank God, right? Intelligent decision in horror movies. But unfortunately, it's just a little bit too late. They're doing what most people should do in a haunting, just book it. The generator kicks on, but there's not enough power for the generator to get this old elevator working. And then, as they go to their other path of escape, the storm knocks a tree down onto the previously mentioned metal hatch doors, which are incredibly unsafe, by the way. Don't know why people still use those things. It's an old building, I get it, but hella unsafe. Because how easy it is for earth to move, or a tree to fall, or something like that. They have no signal for their cells, and they go to use the office landline to try and get help. Only for them to hear a thudding noise coming towards them from down the hall. And they close themselves in the office and call the police. But something's messing with the phone. The police can't understand them at all. Just as they hang up the phone, a bell rings. Then it rings again, closer this time. And again, and again. Austin approaches the closed door and goes to look under it, and at first sees nothing, until he sees the feet of the burned victim, who begins aggressively banging on the outside of the office door. They pull a shelf up against it, and they talk through what's going on. Austin rightly believes that it's because of Jane Doe. The dad isn't convinced. He goes into the connected bathroom to the office, I guess. I don't know why an office is a connected bathroom, but it does. To clean the wrist wound again, as it started to bleed some more, probably from them running and the panic, and lots of things can get a wound reopened. Especially when that wasn't, closed yet all the way, and it just stopped bleeding. But as he's cleaning it, the shower curtain twitches just a little bit. Austin continues talking about how he wishes he left when he'd asked them to earlier, but it's too late for that now. We get a great silhouette scare as Austin sees a figure in the shower curtain. The dad opens it. It's fine. There's nothing there. Until he's pulled backwards. Thrown against the wall behind him, the door slams itself closed. During this air quote ghost attack, the dad sees her eyes. The clouded, grayish eyes. And the dad says that brought him on board to believing. Also probably, the whole being yanked across the room by a person that's not there thing. They leave the office as the silhouette that was in the bathroom flung open the door, throwing the shelf aside. And they re-enter the exam room of the morgue. All the organs they moved have rapidly decomposed in the time they've been gone. So they're like, okay, frick it. They get ready for the crematorium. They're going to take her there. They're going to burn her up. But they get locked inside again. The door seals itself. They can't get it open. Austin grabs the emergency fire axe that's apparently there. This thing's always a trope in movies. I don't know a single time I've seen one of these in real life. But they're great plot devices. And he starts hacking the door open like Danny Torrance. No. Is it Danny? I guess Danny technically does in the sequel, but that's not the... Whatever. Failed horror reference aside. I guess incorrect horror reference aside. But a sound outside the door makes him pause his chopping up of the door. He looks out the cut he's made in the middle of the door. And we get another excellent scare. This time, the old woman corpse looking at them, and then unhinging its stitched mouth open in a scream. At this point, they're running out of options, and they douse Jane with something flammable and just light her on fire with a match. The fire quickly spreads, destroying parts of the room. They grab the fire extinguisher, put it out, and her body's completely untouched. The elevator makes a sound like it's working. And they get the exam door open, they've got the axe, they head out to it, right as the power surges again. They narrowly miss the door closing. But in that round mirror, we see a corpse walking towards them. Bell ringing. Tommy takes the axe, ready to protect his son so he can escape when the elevator door opens. As a figure looms in the dark. Just as Austin is able to pry the elevator doors open and pull his dad in. As the doors to the elevator start to close, the power surges again, leaving it open just a crack. We see a flash of light illuminate the face of the gunshot wound victim. And Tommy swings the axe. As we hear gasping noises. As it's revealed, Emma had come down in the elevator. That was the elevator door opening. Emma coming to check on Austin. And has just taken an axe swing to the neck. There was no walking corpse in that hallway. It was Emma coming to check on them. So Austin cries over the body of his dead loved one, who only came back because of him. Tommy pulls his son back into the elevator and the doors finally close. Just as escaped seemed to be in sight. Even with the loss of Emma, right as they're closing the doors, the elevator breaks down again. This time stopping for good, as the generator is run out of backup power. Austin and Tommy have a very emotional discussion. They gave me sad goosebumps, if that's a thing. As they both blame themselves for Emma's death. And Austin tells his father that he couldn't have known that the body Austin had stayed late to work on would do this to them. Tommy couldn't have known. Tommy says, well, they used to say that too about your mother. That I couldn't have known. And that it's not my fault. we learn that Tommy's nickname for his departed wife was Ray, because she was always his ray of sunshine. His ray of sunshine was always so bright that he was never able to look past that light and see the pain and the unhappiness that she lived with, alone for so long, until she took her own life 2 years ago. Tommy mourns that his mistakes have done so much damage to his son, who's innocent of the mistakes that Tommy made. We'll talk about that too later and what that means, and why that's specifically called out. Austin remarks that she tried to stop them each step of the way as they cut into her. So they decide to find what killed her in hopes of finding a way to stop her, rather than just hiding in the elevator waiting to die. I personally would hide in the elevator wait to die, especially as they see smoke from the crematorium fill the halls, making a dark hallway even harder to navigate. I mean, it is just a straight shot, but you never know what's going to be in there, right? Especially if you can see things that aren't actually there, like the corpse actually being Emma. As they head through the hall, the bodies slash at Tommy in the darkness with his surgical tools, leaving him bloodied by the time they reach it. But they get into the exam room of the morgue and bar the door shut. Now with a wheel-around overhead light on, they cut open the skull to examine the brain, to try and find what she's been hiding. They find a normal brain, and do a cutting, and put it under a microscope. The microscope of the brain reveals why they couldn't find a cause of death. Her brain is still alive. They remark that some energy is keeping her going. Something that neither of them believes in an afterlife, so they're really puzzled by this. But Austin goes back to the cloth and finds that they had been reading it wrong. They're Roman numerals. You need to read it folded to see that it reveals Leviticus 20:27 and year 1693. They read off the verse which reads, "Any man or woman who consults the spirits of the dead shall be put to death, for they are witches, and their blood shall be on their own heads." I couldn't actually find what translation they're using here, but that's pretty close to the verse I inscribed. Like, what they read is pretty close to Leviticus 27, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's just some obscure translation that I didn't check in my 10 I looked up. But we'll talk more about, the wording choice of that verse at the end. They conclude that this is a body from the Salem witch trials. Or at least Austin does. And Tommy remarks, well, they didn't actually kill any witches at Salem. And this one doesn't actually fit the MO of the known Salem witch trial executions. And they give us what they think is their most likely theory, and the explanation that I personally like the best for this Jane Doe. What if the ritual they did to try and stop a witch, when performed on an innocent woman, accidentally created the very thing they were trying to destroy? A supernatural entity akin to a witch. She could feel all the torture they had done to her, and now in her anger she lashes out to make others feel what she endured needlessly. Tommy lifts his shirt to reveal wounds and black marks similar to those on the Jane Doe. It's inner skin injuries. Austin asks a good question. Why us? Tommy responds quickly, why the Douglases? Why anybody? They just happened to cross her path, and thinks that survivors from a previous encounter with this undead witch had buried her away as far from them as possible. Tommy concludes she'll keep torturing and killing until someone makes her suffering stop. Tommy begs with the body, begs to Jane, as the corpses try and work and break the door open. He pleads for his son's life, and it seems to have helped, as the sounds from the bodies stop. But Tommy begins to die. First his joints break as hers mend, Her C-section scars heal as he feels stab wounds. And as Tommy slowly dies, Jane's eyes uncloud. His dad begs him to be put out of his misery with his scalpel as he reaches for it. And Austin eventually relents. As Austin cries over his father's body, finds all is still, all is quiet, and the lights come back on. The bodies return, and the radio plays again. Sheriff Burke is there calling down to them. Austin hurries as they work to clear the tree from the entrance. Austin tries to open the doors as Burke yells to open up! Open up! Open up! Slowly turn to him singing, let the sun shine in. As seeing the dead body of his father jump scare him, throws him off balance, and he falls off the balcony to his death. Ding! Hey there, sorry, I was in the middle of a recording. I paused it. What's up?
Oh, that's okay. I'm fixing to turn out to the street with food.
Oh, awesome. I'm almost done with this recording.
Alright, bye.
Bye. Alright. And we cut to daylight. There's no fallen tree. But the sheriff has yet another crime scene he can't begin to explain rationally. The deputy believes the dad went on a rampage, killing the two kids then taking his own life. As the radio reports that it's their 4th straight day of sunshine. The bodies are all back to where they should be. The Jane Doe is again untouched. In better condition, actually. And they send her body over to VCU to get him out of the sheriff's county and to make them someone else's problem. A close-up on the body reveals her eyes are again clouded, proving the father's attempted sacrifice was for nothing. She's still dead, but inside alive. As the car takes the body away, a pastor on the radio changes to let the sun shine in. As our movie comes to a grim close, with her toe moving just enough to ring its bell, ready to harass another innocent victim. And that has been the plot synopsis of the Autopsy of Jane Doe. Now I'm going to talk about, okay, what actually happened in that movie? What happened? So, there are two generally believed theories. One, that the protagonists are correct to figure it out, that in the attempt to kill a witch, they created a restless supernatural spirit, whether it be like a demon, or just put her in some kind of magical state of undeath, that they basically made a witch on accident, or that that's all bull hockey, and this was a witch that they didn't kill successfully. I prefer the first one because it's more narratively satisfying, as we have Tommy, a husband who didn't pay, from his own words, pay enough attention to his wife during her suffering with depression, and she died. Which, according to the Dad and to the Son, completely upended Austin's life. The actions of the previous generation negatively impacting the younger generation in a way they couldn't have prevented. And we have this body, who was a child, not a child, but like a young woman. They obviously aged her up because the real Salem witch trials were on prepubescent women almost primarily, and obviously they didn't want to have that kind of corpse be done on screen and all that in terms of an autopsy. They aged her up, good call. The elders of her community sentenced her to death for something she didn't do, and in doing so created just this relentless force that targets people who get in its way. It's not any of the victims' fault. They just happen to be in the way of this physical embodiment of a generational curse, basically. Which is why I think the wording of the Bible verse is specific. One, they wanted to use the word witch. But two, they specifically wanted, and the blood will be on their own heads. Which meant, like, their death is upon themselves, basically. Not literally their blood will be on their own head, although that's also a thing. But that's a different thing altogether. Not going to talk about Bible blood rituals here, but we are going to talk about briefly. You might be, if you haven't researched the Salem witch trials, you'd be like, okay, so where would this have come from? Like, this kind of ritual on the body. Surely they didn't actually do anything like that at the Salem witch trials, right? It was just mostly burnings at the stake and drownings. That's not actually entirely true. Because right around the time of this, they say 1693. It's close enough. In the mid-1600s, there was a resurgence in what is called Christian occultism, which is Christian magic. Air quotes around Christian, of course. But attempted biblical uses of magic by the church. It's existed in theological histories all the way back to the actual writing of the New Testament with the sorcerer. Simon, I believe it was his name. And there has been an interlinking of occultism and Christianity as far back as it goes. You even got things like the Trinity, that's where that originates, is from an occult religion of the time having its godhead. And they decided to recop it for Christianity because they had three gods, but the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But at the time, what would become modern Judaism was moving away from polytheism, with like kind of the writing out of God's wife and stuff like that from the original Hebrew. This is something I've studied a lot, so I'd be definitely I could talk about this for a whole podcast episode, but I won't. Because Judaism was moving away from polytheism at the time of Jesus, the modern church felt like they needed to do the same in order to draw in both Jews and Gentiles. To do so, they created the idea of the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But that in of itself predates back to occult beliefs of the time. So, air quotes, Christians using magic to try and solve problems in what they believed was a holy fashion is nothing new. And the Salem witch trials were right around the time of a resurgence of that belief system with the, I believe it's called the Key of Solomon. Basically a book of, air quotes, holy magic that was wrongly attributed to being Solomon's. It's actually not that old. I researched this at the time of writing the script, but I'm recording the script about 4 or 5 weeks after I wrote the script, because I didn't think the stories would take this long. It's really interesting. I could do a whole... There's other movies like it, like The Vivitch. I think they even briefly talk about it in Fear Street, where I could talk more about the idea of Christian occultism. But that's basically what happened here, is a group of Christian occultists thought they could kill a witch using Bible magic. Fricked it up because, or we'll at least say for the sake of the narrative, God doesn't love Bible magic, or at least the Christian God doesn't love Bible magic, and their attempts at being holy were actually demonic, and they created a demonic entity that can frick around with dead bodies and make ghosts and spirits and illusions. There was no thunderstorm. That was the whatever in Jane. I call it like the spirit of Jane Doe, or the witch, the entity. There's a ton of names for it online. It was trying to get them to leave because Jane Doe, is in constant pain and hurt, and she lashes out with that pain and hurt. But because she was an innocent person before, she seems to do her best in the limited way she's able to try and get innocent people away from her. That's at least the theory. And they didn't listen, or they didn't get it, more accurately. They didn't get the point. And then that kind of inscripted evil within her as they kind of opened her up. Made it so she was able to have less control, less holdback. As they pulled out, opened up the rune work of her skin. That was probably holding in some of the magic. They pulled out the rune bag, which presumably was containing some of the magic to inside of her corpse, which would have prevented her from doing magic stuff from outside of the room, presumably. It would explain why it was hyper-localized before they remove it. Things like that. And by them just not understanding and her inability to directly communicate, they fall prey to this very interesting and unique horror movie monster. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of the Autopsy of Jane Doe. I freaking love this film. I think the Jane Doe witch is one of the most underrated horror creatures, and it's just its uniqueness. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.